All right, so this is our study on Habakkuk, and we're going to be looking at part one. I don't know how many parts this is going to be. It's 3 chapters long. It might be 2 parts for each chapter, so 6 parts in total. And we'll see how that goes. But we want to welcome you tonight, and those that are listening on later on, we want to welcome you as well to the Bible study of Habakkuk. All right, so we'll get started as we look at this very interesting book. We're in chapter 1 tonight. We're looking at verses 1 through 11. So that's Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. So here's our introduction tonight, the age-old question. Have you heard this one before? Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Have you heard that ever been asked before? Anybody that you can remember, have you ever asked this question yourself? Well, here we can find the answer. This book. I tire when I hear other Christians struggle with this question. It can be answered. I heard one time, I remember I was Bible studying, this man brought this question forth and he says, we can't answer it. And I thought, are you kidding? You can't answer this? Of course it can be answered. This book here, right here, Habakkuk, he's going to get the answer from the Lord. So we find it here in this minor prophet book. Habakkuk's name means wrestler, means one who wrestles, grapples and wrestles. So we know little about this man himself, but we have an excellent understanding of the time period that he lived, as it seemed to reappear in our modern age. I think we're seeing it. What I mean is, I think we're seeing this time period that he had kind of reappear in our time. And so let's look at it. We're just doing some introduction here. Habakkuk, the man, was, hold on, let me admit someone. Okay. He was a man, he was a priest in the king's court, very likely godly King Josiah. He saw his nation leave a position of revival and decline to apostasy. The time period that we are looking at is from 612 BC to 586 BC. 4 very important events happened during the prophecy of Habakkuk. So let me give them to you. The first one is in 612 BC, when he started his prophecy. It was the destruction of Nineveh by the Babylonians. We studied that through the book of Nahum. So this is a very, very prominent time period, 612 BC. Nineveh is destroyed by the Babylonians. 605 BC, so now we're going 7 years later to 605 BC, the Battle of Carchemish ended. This Carchemish is right when you go up the Euphrates River, just when you get into the modern nation of Turkey, you'll get to the old ancient battle site and the city, the ancient ruins of the city of Carchemish. This battle, Carchemish, ended with the Assyrian and Egyptian empires. They were over at this battle. The first captivity of Judah, and then Daniel is also taken to Babylon during this year, 605 BC. 586 BC, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the beginning of the 70-year captivity of Judah. So you see there's the 4 different things. There's the destruction in Nineveh, there's the battle of Carchemish, there's the captivity of Judah same year, 586, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the beginning of the 70-year captivity of Judah. Habakkuk either witnessed the captivity or experienced the events leading up to it. So we're not too sure where he is in all this, but according to his prophecy, we can see what time period he's writing about. Here we have a man who lived in 2 extremes. On the one hand, he witnessed the joys of revival. On the other, the sorrows of spiritual decline. As this was taking place in his nation, he was also witnessing the rise of a very evil Babylonian empire. In 612 BC, the populated and ancient city of Nineveh fell. A few years later, the great Assyrian-Egyptian coalition fell at the Battle of Carchemish to the Babylonians. That happened in 605 BC once again. In the same year, Habakkuk's nation was attacked by the Babylonians, and wealthy Israelis like Daniel was taken into captivity. A few years after that, in 597, the Babylonians returned a second time and took away more in captivity, including Ezekiel. Habakkuk is witnessing all of this. Why is God allowing this to happen to his nation? What is God doing? Can you imagine? You're watching all this. You started in the time of Josiah, and then you watched how the decline of the nation went, and then all these things happened one by one. It must have been very difficult for this man. And so that's why he starts. Here it is, Habakkuk 1, verse 1. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. A burden? Yes. This is prophet jargon. He is saying that he comes with heavy tidings. The people are going to go through hard times. That's what this book is about. Hard times are going to happen. And so he's prophesying them. It's a burden. It's the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. And then the last part, which Habakkuk the prophet did see, yes, this is a vision. God is showing him what is coming to pass, and he is describing it. It's going to make that description. So remember, we talked about the meaning of the name Habakkuk. He is the wrestler. He is now going to lock arms with the Lord and come to terms with what is happening to God's people. He wants to know, why is all of this going on? So Habakkuk is well named. And we can see God's providence is in his name. It's in his name. The wrestler. He wants to know the answer. Why are they facing all this trouble in their day? God's going to give them an answer. You'll see. So now verse 2. Oh Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, or the violence that I'm going through, and thou wilt not save. So he's crying to God, and he's asking him to deliver him from the violence. And yet there seems to be no answer. The word save in this context means deliver. He needs deliverance. They're going through a difficult time. Let us keep in mind that Habakkuk had seen horrible things or horrific things in his homeland, and he can compare. He remembers how it used to be when godly King Josiah ruled Judah. All was well, although it was known that there was an undercurrent of evil, but it had gone underground. So there were people that were worshiping idols during Josiah's time, but it was underground. It wasn't on the surface, everything looked right, but underground, it wasn't right. Now it is out in the open. Sounds a little bit like our day, doesn't it? It's all out in the open. And he has been dutifully praying, and nothing has changed. In fact, his national situation has worsened. Have you ever felt like this? You're just praying and praying, and at the end of your prayer, it just seems like not only is it not being answered the way you want it to be answered, but the situation is not getting any better. In fact, if anything, it's getting worse. Have you ever felt like that? That's what's going on here. He's crying out. He's saying, I'm praying. I'm crying out to you, and you will not hear. It's a little bit of a complaint here. He says, I'm crying to thee. The violence I'm going through, that I'm watching, that I'm seeing with my own eyes, and yet you won't come down and deliver us. You won't save us. Isn't that interesting how in the Bible we have this type of dialogue going on? Look at verse 3. He continues his complaint. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance. For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that rise up strife and contention. So he's seeing all this. And this is what I think. This could have been written yesterday. There is no new thing under the sun. Societies have been corrupted before. The question begs, why, God, are you allowing this evil to happen? It is like you are disinterested and you let evil go on without abandon. There is an unhindered sin going on. People are dying and grieving. There is looting and violence on the streets. That sounds familiar. People are fighting and arguing openly. Why? What is going on, Lord? This is happening right before his eyes. And then verse 4, he continues his complaint. He says, therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. Did you get that? For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. What's he saying? He's saying laws are liberalized, and judgment is neutralized. The wicked are surrounding the God-fearing. And this is continuing forward without abandon. Are we seeing these things even now? Then why is God allowing it to happen? Habakkuk is asking the age-old question, why, God, do you allow evil things to happen to good people? That's the question. It's in the Bible. Here's a note from the Life Application Bible. Saddened by the violence and corruption he saw around him, Habakkuk poured out his heart to God. Today's injustice is still rampant, but don't let your concern cause you to doubt God or rebel against him. Instead, consider the message that God gave Habakkuk and recognize God's long-range plans and purposes. Realize that God is doing right, even when you do not understand why he works as he does. Why are we going through what we're going through now? So God gives his answer. What's the answer to Habakkuk's complaint? Here it is. Verse 5. Now God speaks. Habakkuk began his prophecy, and that's sort of what this is. It's sort of a question and answer session. He asks a question, God answers. He asks a question, God answers. And then in the end, he's going to do a beautiful sonnet, like a poetic Hebrew sonnet, like a psalm, really. And that's also very interesting. So here's God's answer, verse 5. Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. Oh, wow, you're going to work, huh? What are you going to do? Well, he'll tell you. We think that whenever God does things, he just allows good things to happen, but sometimes God allows things to happen to bring judgment and justice. And he can use heathen nations to do that. And that's what we're going to see in our context. Okay, so let me show you this note, interesting note. God responds to Habakkuk's questions and concerns by stating that he would do amazing acts that would astound Habakkuk. When circumstances around us become almost unbearable, we wonder if God has forgotten us. But remember, he is in control. Do you think God's in control today? He definitely is. I said this recently. I said this very statement in church recently. God has a plan. God has a plan and will judge evildoers in his time. See, we want God to come down and judge in our time, but I really wonder if we do. If we are truly humble, we will be willing to accept God's answers and await his timing. Right? Yes. I think it's pride that causes us to get angry and say, well, why aren't you doing this? And it's just almost like we're on the throne instead of God being on his throne. God told the inhabitants of Jerusalem that they would be utterly amazed at what he was about to do. The people would, in fact, see a series of unbelievable events. Number one, their own independent and prosperous kingdom, Judah, the southern kingdom of Israel, would suddenly become a vassal nation. In other words, they would become a nation state under the dominion of Babylon, a vassal nation, not their own independent nation. Number two, Egypt, a world power for centuries, would be crushed almost overnight. That's just, man, you can't imagine that in those days. Egypt was very powerful. How could they be crushed overnight? Well, they do. 605, they do. Number three, Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, would be so completely ransacked that people would forget where it had been. And that's laughable in those days. We don't understand that now, but if you lived in that time, you'd be like, what, Nineveh? Be so gone that people would remember where it was? They would forget where it was? Yeah, exactly. And number four, the Babylonians would rise to power. Though these words were indeed amazing, the people saw them fulfilled during their lifetime. So once again, the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC ended the Assyrian and Egyptian empires. Now we're looking at verse 6. Now he's going to describe what the Babylonians will be like. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans. And I believe the reason why God puts Chaldeans there so that he can be descriptive that this vassal state of the Assyrian Empire that rose into prominence and became the Babylonians, they're the ones. And he says, that bitter and hasty nation. So he's describing what they're like, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. This is what they're going to do. They're in for domination, world domination. They're not just satisfied with just a little piece of land there in the Fertile Crescent. They want to reach everywhere that they can and dominate as many as they can. They want world domination. Habakkuk watched the Babylonians arise in 630 BC. More than likely he did. Quickly they rose into prominence on the ancient world scene. They were even more cruel than their counterparts. In 612 BC, and when I mean counterparts, I'm talking about the Assyrians or the Egyptians or even others. In 612 BC, they destroyed the city of Nineveh. Habakkuk had read the writings in the book of Nahum. He read about this and in other prophets as well. Babylon moved with haste and brought bitterness to those they conquered. This was all in the hands of the Lord. He was working in the background to bring judgment to the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, and to chastise the children of Israel for their evil. He was answering the evil. He was doing it in his time and in his way. So he's answering his question. He's saying, well, when are you going to bring justice? I don't know if Habakkuk really wanted justice for his nation. I don't think he did, but he was going to get it. Now look at verse 7. This is more description of what the Babylonians would be like. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. We have a saying, don't we? Their reputation precedes them. That's what that is. Their reputation precedes themselves. They are terrible. People were talking. saying, these people are terrible or terrorizing. They are dreadful. People fear and dread their coming. They had heard what happens to those they conquer, and it does not bode well for them. Anybody they conquer, it's bad. It's bad news. That's what God's saying there. Now look at verse 8. Their horses also are swifter than leopards and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as an eagle that hasteth to eat. Description of the horsemen. Chariots and horsemen were the ancient tanks of the day. So when you talked about a field of horsemen, that was scary to those people. And these were the tactics that the Babylonians imposed during battle. These were their tactics. The horsemen would charge without abandon, stomping foot soldiers, heartlessly under their hoofs, looking for a weakness in their enemy and swooping down and pouncing in a moment, like an eagle would just pounce on its prey. This is what they would do. They were fierce. You'll see three different types of bird of prey, but animals of prey as well. You got leopards there, you got evening wolves, and then you've got the eagle there. So this is what they're like. Using descriptions of nature to describe how heartless, cruel, and terrible they are. Okay, now verse 9. They shall come all for violence. That's their purpose. They're not really looking for dominion as much as they just want to be violent. Their faces shall sup up the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. So this is their nature. They were in for the violence of war. They worshiped war, these Babylonians. I'm sure they prayed to war. And they wanted to fight and destroy. That's what they were. They were all about destruction. They fed on it. They ate it up. It was their meals. That's what they ate. And that's what the supping up the east wind means. Supping, sitting down for a meal. And the east wind is, of course, a destroying wind. And whenever you see that eastern wind in the Bible, it's talking about a destroying wind, a wind that destroys the people, a wind that brings locusts and plagues and trouble. And so they're just trouble. And so it's like saying they feed on war, looting, crushing, and enslaving people. And so we need to keep in mind that they're committing great evil, and we'll need to account it before for God. God's going to bring judgment to the Babylonians as well. God used them to bring judgment on the different nations who had fallen and were ripe for judgment. But then later on, the Babylonians themselves, and they didn't last that long. What was it, about 200 or 300 years? I don't think they even last that long. But they were destructive. Now we're looking at verse 10. This is their respect. This is how they respect people. And they shall scoff at kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, and they shall heap dust and take it. So these are people without a code of honor. There's no code of honor with these Babylonians. They are cruel and violent people. So Habakkuk wanted an answer. He says, when are you going to bring judgment? When are you going to bring justice? I want to know. I see all this going on around me in my nation. I see this happening. And God says, all right, I'll tell you what'll happen. It'll happen in my time. This is my answer. You see, Habakkuk wanted God to take care of the wickedness of his people. And God will do it. And let me just say, God will take care of wickedness. The wickedness is going on in the earth today. All this foolishness, all this sin, just evil going on, all the different things that are happening on the earth today. God will bring an answer to the wickedness of man. He'll do it his way. And it's through the years I've heard people do this. People will complain to the Lord about the cause, and they do not realize the extent of the cure. They want God to clean up the land. They want God to take care of the wickedness on the land, but they don't realize the extent of the cure. And so my thought is people need to stop complaining and start obeying. And now verse 11. Then shall his mind change. So the his there is Babylon's. And he shall pass over and offend. And he's saying he will offend. He doesn't say who, but he's offending the Lord. That's what it's referring to. Imputing this his power unto his God. So instead of giving God the glory, he gives his God of war or God of lust or God of, whatever it is that he worships as a Babylonian leader and soldier. He will not honor God. And you say, well, these people didn't know any better. Oh, really? They did. And so verse 11, look at this. God was going to give Babylon a fair chance to be a world empire. So remember when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream and Daniel described the dream, he said, you're the head of gold. I think what he was telling Nebuchadnezzar during that dream was, you're going to be blessed. God's going to bless you, and he's going to help you. And remember, Daniel was there. He's one of the greatest, I would say, Old Testament believers in the Bible. There's nothing ever spoken of Daniel in a negative way. In fact, there are two people in the Bible that I would say are never spoken of in a negative way. And one's Daniel, and the other one is Joseph of Egypt. They were both godly men, and they were taken in captivity. It's very interesting how their lives correlate together, one in Egypt, the other one in Babylon. And so Daniel had the ear of the king of Babylon. And then if you go to chapter 3 of the book of Daniel, it talks about his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're cast into a fiery furnace, and God delivers them. And then in chapter 4, the king was made mad for 7 years. And then in the end, he submits to God. But apparently he did not pass on his faith. I believe that King Nebuchadnezzar actually came to faith. He trusted the Lord, became an Old Testament believer. I believe we're going to see him in heaven. But not his grandson, Belshazzar. He was destroyed, and then we have the saying, people still say it, the handwriting was on the wall. That's where we get that from, chapter 5 of Daniel. The stiff-necked Babylonians would give the glory to their false idols of war and success instead of where it belonged. That's what verse 11 is saying here. Society does that today. I really am a little concerned when I hear the world looking up for help from experts and politicians instead of the Lord. I get a little bit concerned about that. We should be looking to the Lord, and then the pandemic continues. So the book of Habakkuk is right up to date with modern society. And we find that man doesn't change. So God's people need to warn as Habakkuk did in his day. We need to give people the gospel. We need to help people understand their need for Christ. We need to give God the glory when he delivers our nation. And we need to also pray for our nation that they will also look to God and not just thank some earthly system whatever that may be. We need to pray for them, but we should not be giving them the glory over God. And that's really the message tonight. Nebuchadnezzar, unfortunately, did not pass that on to his son. And it doesn't seem that he even passed it on to his nation. And that's really sad. So we'll continue on next week, and we'll finish chapter 1 with Habakkuk's second question. He's going to come to another question, and we'll talk about that next week. Okay, we're at our trivia time.